You're too slow. We'll eat without you. Those 8 words destroyed 73 years of believing I mattered. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to tell these stories that need to be heard. My name is Eleanor Walsh, and I live in a modest 2-story house in suburban Chicago, where the autumn leaves collect in my driveway like forgotten promises. The house still smells like the cinnamon candles my late husband Thomas used to buy me every Christmas. 27 Christmases before cancer took him 3 years ago. Now I light them alone, their warm glow casting shadows across photo frames filled with faces that rarely visit anymore. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October when everything changed. I remember because Tuesdays were my baking days, the one routine I'd maintained since Thomas passed. Apple cinnamon pie, his favorite recipe, made from scratch with Granny Smith apples I'd personally selected from the farmer's market that morning. My arthritic hands had worked the dough slowly, carefully, the way my mother taught me 60 years ago when I was just a girl learning to make a house feel like home. The pie sat cooling on my kitchen counter, its golden crust gleaming under the fluorescent light, steam still rising from the lattice pattern I'd woven with shaking but determined fingers. It was beautiful. Perfect, even. The kind of pie that used to make my daughter Sarah's eyes light up when she was 7 years old, standing on a step stool beside me, flour dusting her dark curls as she learned to crimp the edges. I was getting dressed for dinner at Sarah's house, our monthly family gathering that had become sacred to me after Thomas died. These meals were all I had left of feeling like I belonged somewhere, like I was still somebody's mother, still somebody's grandmother. I'd chosen my navy cardigan, the one Sarah had complimented last spring, and my pearl earrings, the ones Thomas gave me for our 25th anniversary. My phone buzzed against the bedroom dresser. A text from Sarah. "You're too slow. We'll eat without you." I read it 3 times, each word hitting me like a physical blow. No, sorry, Mom. No, take your time. No, we'll keep your plate warm. Just a cold, clinical dismissal delivered through the impersonal medium of a text message, as if I were some inconvenience to be managed rather than the woman who had given birth to her, raised her, sacrificed everything for her happiness. I stood there in my bedroom, fully dressed, holding that phone, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked, like ice on a pond when the temperature drops too fast. You can still see through it, but you know it won't hold weight anymore. The pie was still warm when I wrapped it in foil and put it in the refrigerator. I set one place at my kitchen table. Just one plate, one fork, one glass of water. The silence in the house felt different that night. Not peaceful, like it used to when Thomas would read his newspaper after dinner. This silence felt hollow, echoing with the absence of voices that used to fill these rooms with laughter and conversation. I ate a small portion of the pie alone, tasting nothing but the salt of tears I refused to let fall. Each bite reminded me of all the meals I'd prepared for family gatherings, all the hours I'd spent shopping, cooking, cleaning, trying to create moments of joy for people who apparently couldn't wait an extra 20 minutes for their 73-year-old mother to arrive. That night, lying in the bed I'd shared with Thomas for 42 years, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when I had become an inconvenience. When had my presence become optional? When had the woman who had driven carpool for 8 years, attended every school play, every soccer game, every graduation ceremony, become too slow to matter? The text kept replaying in my mind like a broken record. "You're too slow." As if speed were the measure of my worth. As if a lifetime of love could be dismissed because my arthritis made me move more carefully. Because my weakened knees required me to take my time on stairs. Because growing old in a youth-obsessed world had somehow made me less valuable as a human being. I thought about Sarah as a child. How she used to beg me to walk slower during our neighborhood strolls because her little legs couldn't keep up. "Wait for me, Mommy," she'd call out. And I'd always stop, always wait, always make sure she felt included and loved. When had that patience stopped being returned? The next morning brought no apology text, no phone call asking if I was all right, no acknowledgement that perhaps their behavior had been cruel. Just silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words, that confirms your worst fears about how little you actually matter to the people you love most. I made my morning coffee and sat at the kitchen table where Thomas and I had shared breakfast for decades, where we'd planned our children's futures and dreamed about grandchildren who would fill this house with joy again. The empty chair across from me seemed to mock those memories, reminding me that not only had I lost my husband, but I was losing my family too, one dismissive text at a time. That's when I realized something that made my hands shake as I set down my coffee cup. This wasn't the first time. This was just the first time the cruelty had been put in writing, preserved in digital form where I couldn't pretend I'd misunderstood or overreacted. There had been other signs, other moments when I'd been made to feel like my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. The birthday dinner where they'd started eating the cake before I'd finished my meal. The Christmas morning when they'd opened presents while I was still getting dressed. The phone calls that ended abruptly when I shared concerns about my health or loneliness. I had been shrinking myself for years, accepting less and less consideration, telling myself that at least I was still included, still part of their lives. But that text, those 8 simple words, had finally shown me the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't part of their lives. I was just an obligation they endured. The morning after that text, I found myself standing in front of my bedroom closet, staring at a cardboard box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were photo albums, letters, and receipts. The paper trail of a mother's love that had apparently gone unnoticed and unappreciated. I pulled out Sarah's baby book first. Every page meticulously filled out in my careful handwriting. First smile. 6 weeks. 2 days. First word. Mama. First steps. 11 months, standing in our old kitchen, arms outstretched toward me with complete trust that I would catch her if she fell. I always did. The memories flooded back like a dam bursting. Sarah's childhood asthma attacks that kept me awake night after night. Humidifier running. My hand on her tiny chest feeling for each precious breath. The time she broke her arm falling off her bike, and I held her in the emergency room for 6 hours, whispering that everything would be okay while she cried into my shoulder. I remembered the mother-daughter dance lessons I'd paid for when she was 12, even though money was tight after Thomas's construction business had a slow season. $40 lessons every week for 2 years because she'd seen other girls dancing and wanted to try. I'd sit in that stuffy studio watching her twirl and leap, my heart swelling with pride even as I calculated how many extra grocery coupons I'd need to clip to make ends meet. There was the prom dress. Oh, that prom dress. $300 at a boutique in downtown Chicago. More than I'd ever spent on a single piece of clothing in my life, but Sarah had fallen in love with it. A shimmering blue gown that made her look like a princess. I'd worked double shifts at the diner for a month to afford it, my feet aching and my back screaming, but worth every blister to see her face light up. College tuition. $37,000 a year at Northwestern University. Thomas and I had remortgaged the house, taken out loans, liquidated our modest savings account. I'd gone without new clothes for 3 years, drove a car with a broken air conditioner through 2 brutal Chicago summers. All so Sarah could get the education we'd never had. The letters were harder to read. Thank you notes from Sarah during her college years, gushing with gratitude and love. Mom, I don't know how you and Dad do it, but thank you for making my dreams possible. I love you so much. I promise I'll make you proud. She had made us proud. Graduated summa cum laude. Landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm. Married David. A nice enough man from a wealthy family who'd whisked her away to their sprawling house in Winnetka. They'd had 2 children. Emma, now 16, and Jake, 13. My grandchildren, who used to run to me with open arms whenever I visited, who now barely looked up from their phones when I walked into a room. I found the checkbook ledgers next. Page after page of payments I'd made over the years, each one a small sacrifice I'd convinced myself was just what mothers do. Sarah's graduate school tuition when she decided to get her MBA. $23,000 from my portion of Thomas's life insurance policy. The down payment on her first apartment. $15,000 from the nest egg I'd been building for our retirement. The pattern was all there in black and white. When Sarah and David's first child was born, I'd flown to Chicago immediately, staying for 3 weeks to help with the baby while Sarah recovered from her C-section. I'd cooked, cleaned, done laundry, changed diapers, and gotten up for midnight feedings so she could sleep. When I'd mentioned being tired, she'd snapped, I'm the one who just had major surgery, Mom. When their second child arrived, I'd done the same thing. 3 weeks of my life, freely given, sleeping on their uncomfortable couch because the guest room had been converted to a nursery. My own doctor had advised against traveling so soon after my hip replacement surgery. But Sarah had been so overwhelmed, so desperate for help. I'd paid for the children's piano lessons, their summer camps, their school supplies. I'd babysat countless weekends when Sarah and David wanted to go out, never asking for payment, just grateful to spend time with my grandchildren. I'd hosted Christmas Eve dinner for 8 years running, cooking for days, cleaning my house until it sparkled, creating magical holidays for everyone while my own needs went unnoticed. The Mother's Day gifts had grown smaller and more impersonal over the years, from handmade cards and breakfast in bed when Sarah was young, to expensive jewelry when she was financially successful but emotionally distant, to gift cards in recent years. Last Mother's Day, I'd received a generic card with a printed message and a $25 gift certificate to Target. Not even signed, just Mom in Sarah's hurried handwriting. But it was the medical bills that really broke my heart. When I'd had my breast cancer scare 2 years ago, I'd called Sarah crying, terrified and alone. She'd listened for 5 minutes before saying she had to go to Emma's volleyball game. "I'm sure it's nothing, Mom. Try not to worry." She'd sent flowers to the hospital after my biopsy, but hadn't visited, hadn't called to check on me when I was recovering, hadn't offered to drive me to follow-up appointments. I'd sat in that oncology waiting room alone, surrounded by other patients with their adult children holding their hands, while I clutched my purse and pretended not to notice the pitying looks from the nurses. The biopsy was benign, thank God, but the loneliness during those terrifying weeks had been almost worse than the fear of cancer. The financial documentation was the most damning. I'd been supporting Sarah's family in ways I'd never fully acknowledged. The emergency loan of $5,000 when David's business hit a rough patch, never repaid. The $800 for Emma's orthodontics when their insurance didn't cover it. The constant stream of birthday money, Christmas money, graduation money, flowing in one direction like a river that never expected to be replenished. I'd given them my old car when mine died, a reliable Honda with only 40,000 miles, because they'd mentioned needing a second vehicle. I'd watched them give it to their teenage daughter as her first car, while I'd had to finance a used sedan at 70 years old. The worst part was reading my own handwriting in the margins of some of these documents. Notes I'd made to myself, justifications for why each sacrifice was necessary, reasonable, temporary, just until they get back on their feet, just until the kids are older, just until David's promotion comes through, just until. But the until had never come. I found Thomas's funeral program tucked between the pages of a photo album. His memorial service had been beautiful. I'd spent weeks planning every detail, wanting to honor the man who'd loved me for 42 years. Sarah had given a touching eulogy about what a wonderful father he'd been, how he'd taught her to ride a bike and helped with her homework. But she'd barely mentioned me, the woman who'd stood beside him through every moment of their daughter's childhood. After the service, people had told me how lucky I was to have such a devoted daughter, how Sarah would surely take care of me in my old age, how blessed I was to have family who loved me. I'd smiled and nodded, believing it myself. But devotion doesn't leave you sitting alone on your birthday. Love doesn't forget to call when you're sick. Family doesn't tell you you're too slow to share a meal. I closed the box and carried it back to the closet, my hands shaking with something I couldn't quite name. Was it anger? Grief? Recognition? All I knew was that I'd been living a lie for years, telling myself that this was what love looked like. One-sided, conditional, convenient. I'd been so afraid of losing them that I'd allowed myself to disappear instead, shrinking smaller and smaller until I was just a convenient resource to be accessed when needed and ignored when not. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Margaret, someone I'd lost touch with after she'd moved to Arizona to be closer to her son. We'd been close once, before family obligations and the demands of caregiving had consumed all my time and energy. "Eleanor?" Her voice was warm with surprise. "My goodness, it's been so long. How are you, dear?" I started to give my usual answer. Fine, just fine. But something stopped me. Instead, I told her the truth. about the text message, about the loneliness, about the years of feeling like I was disappearing. Margaret listened without interrupting, making small sounds of understanding and sympathy. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor," she said finally, "I think you need to ask yourself a very important question." "What's that?" Was I used? The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Was I used? The question I'd been avoiding, the truth I'd been too afraid to face. Yes, I realized with startling clarity. Yes, I had been used. Systematically, thoroughly, completely used by the people I loved most in the world, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than sadness or resignation. I felt angry. Margaret's question echoed in my mind for days. Was I used? The more I thought about it, the more I began to notice things I'd been blind to before. Or perhaps I'd trained myself not to see them, the way you learn not to look directly at the sun. It started with my 73rd birthday, just 2 months before that devastating text message. I'd been excited for weeks, dropping hints about maybe having a small celebration. Nothing fancy, just family dinner, maybe a cake. Sarah had listened with distracted nods, always checking her phone while I spoke. Her attention split between my words and whatever urgent message demanded her immediate response. The day arrived on a gray Thursday in August. I'd dressed carefully in my good lavender dress, the one Thomas always said brought out my eyes. I'd even gone to the salon the day before, splurging on a wash and set that made my silver hair gleam like moonlight. I felt pretty for the first time in months. I waited all day for the phone to ring. All day. I organized my medicine cabinet twice, dusted furniture that was already clean, even baked myself a small angel food cake, just in case someone stopped by. The house felt impossibly quiet, each tick of the grandmother clock in the hallway marking another minute of silence. At 3 o'clock, I received a text from Sarah. "Happy birthday, Mom! Sorry, crazy busy day. Call you later." She never called. Emma, my 16-year-old granddaughter, posted 17 Instagram stories that day. I know because I'd finally learned how to use social media, desperately trying to stay connected to my family's lives. 17 posts about her friends, her Starbucks drink, her new shoes. Not one mention that it was her grandmother's birthday. I ate my angel food cake alone that night, each bite tasting like disappointment. The silence in my house wasn't peaceful anymore. It was accusatory, reminding me that I'd somehow become so insignificant that my own birth wasn't worth remembering. But that was just one day. The real damage came from the accumulation of smaller moments, tiny paper cuts that eventually bled you dry. There was the family barbecue in June where I'd spent an entire morning making my famous potato salad, the recipe Sarah used to beg me to make for every occasion. I'd arrived carrying the heavy bowl, my arthritis making my hands ache, only to find that Sarah had ordered potato salad from the grocery store deli. "Oh, you made some too?" she'd said with mild annoyance, as if I'd created an inconvenience rather than contributed to the meal. "Well, we already have plenty, but I guess we can put yours out too." My homemade salad, crafted with love and memories, sat untouched while everyone ate the store-bought version. I'd thrown away 3/4 of it the next day, the waste feeling like a metaphor for something I couldn't quite name. The phone calls had become exercises in endurance. Sarah would call me maybe twice a month, always while multitasking. I could hear her typing, opening mail, talking to the kids in the background. Our conversations followed the same pattern. Perfunctory questions about my health, updates about the children's activities delivered in a rushed monotone, and an abrupt ending when something more important demanded her attention. "Mom, I have to go. Emma needs help with her college applications." "Mom, David's calling me. We'll talk later." "Mom, I'm running late for yoga. Take care." I'd learned to compress my entire life into 30-second summaries, afraid that if I took too long to answer, "How are you?" she'd find an excuse to hang up. My loneliness, my fears about aging, my grief over Thomas, none of it fit into the narrow window of patience she allocated for her mother. The grandchildren had grown up and away from me so gradually I hadn't noticed it happening. Emma used to spend weekends at my house, and we'd bake cookies and watch old movies together. She'd curl up next to me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, asking endless questions about what life was like when I was young. Those conversations had been pure gold to me, Connections across generations, wisdom passed down like family heirlooms. Now Emma was 16 and lived in a world of friends and social media and college preparations. When she did visit, which was rare, she stayed glued to her phone, responding to my questions with one-word answers and eye rolls that made me feel ancient and irrelevant. Emma, tell me about school. How are your classes? Fine. Are you still playing volleyball? Yeah. I'd love to come watch a game sometime. A pause, then a glance at her mother. They're usually during the week, Grandma, and the gym gets really crowded. The message was clear. Your presence would be an embarrassment. Jake, my 13-year-old grandson, had stopped hugging me altogether. He'd hit puberty, and suddenly physical affection from his grandmother was mortifying. I understood. Teenage boys need their space. But what hurt was that no one had replaced the physical connection with anything else. No longer conversations, no shared interests, no relationship at all beyond obligatory presence at family gatherings. The medical appointments had become particularly lonely. When I'd had a small procedure done on my eyes last spring, cataracts that were making it hard to drive safely, I'd mentioned it to Sarah weeks in advance. "Oh, that's outpatient, right?" she'd asked. "You'll be fine. They do those procedures all the time." I'd arranged my own transportation through a medical transport service, sat alone in the waiting room while other patients had family members holding their hands, and recovered at home with no one to check on me. The procedure went well, but the loneliness was overwhelming. I'd called Sarah that evening to let her know everything was okay. "That's great, Mom. I knew you'd be fine. Listen, I can't talk long. We're having people over for dinner." She'd hung up before I could tell her how scared I'd been, how the temporary blindness from the eye drops had made me feel helpless and vulnerable, how I'd cried with relief when my vision cleared and I could see the world again. The holidays had become elaborate productions where I was simultaneously essential and invisible. Essential because they needed me to bring specific dishes, to provide family history and stories for the grandchildren, to maintain traditions that connected them to their past. Invisible because my opinions about plans were rarely sought, my dietary restrictions were forgotten, and my physical limitations were treated as inconveniences rather than realities. Last Christmas, they'd moved the celebration to 2 p.m. instead of our traditional 5 p.m. dinner. No one asked if the earlier time worked for me. They'd simply announced the change in a group text. When I'd mentioned that I'd already prepared a dinner menu and had been cooking all morning, Sarah had sighed audibly. "Mom, we have to work around everyone's schedules. David's parents are hosting something at 6 and the kids have plans later. Can't you just adjust?" I'd spent 3 days cooking traditional Polish dishes that had been in our family for generations. Pierogi made by hand, kielbasa from the butcher shop Thomas and I had patronized for decades, poppy seed cake from my grandmother's recipe. I'd served it all at 2 p.m. to people who were already thinking about their next engagement, rushing through a meal that represented hours of labor and decades of tradition. They'd left by 4 p.m., leaving me with mountains of dishes and enough leftover food to feed me for 2 weeks. I'd sat in my kitchen that evening, surrounded by dirty pots and pans, wondering when Christmas had stopped being about family and started being about logistics. The financial boundary crossing had become so normalized I'd stopped noticing it. Sarah had my credit card information for emergencies, which had gradually expanded to include convenience purchases, groceries when she was running late, gas for her car when she forgot her wallet, online orders that were easier to put on my card than to dig out her own. "I'll pay you back, Mom," was her constant refrain. But the repayments came irregularly and never covered the full amounts. I'd stopped keeping track because asking for my own money back made me feel petty and small. The final insult had come just weeks before the "too slow" text message. I'd fallen in my kitchen, nothing serious, just a slip on some spilled juice, but it had shaken me. At 73, every fall carries the potential for catastrophe. I'd called Sarah, needing comfort more than medical attention. "Are you hurt?" she'd asked. And when I said I was probably fine, her tone shifted to mild irritation. "Mom, you scared me. I thought something terrible had happened. Maybe you should think about getting one of those alert necklaces." An alert necklace. So when I fell, a stranger from a call center could dispatch an ambulance instead of my daughter having to be bothered with my emergencies. "I was hoping you might come check on me," I'd said quietly. I can't just drop everything every time you have a minor accident, Mom. I have responsibilities. I'd hung up feeling foolish for thinking my safety might qualify as one of those responsibilities. That night, lying in bed with a heating pad on my bruised hip, I'd finally allowed myself to think the thought I'd been avoiding for months. I was not loved. I was tolerated. I was a duty to be managed, a burden to be endured, a checkbook to be accessed when convenient. The woman who had given birth to Sarah, raised her, sacrificed for her, loved her unconditionally, that woman had become invisible, her worth measured only by her utility. And tomorrow I would receive that text message that would finally shatter the last of my illusions. You're too slow. We'll eat without you. But tonight, for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my anger. And it felt like waking up. The anger that had been building inside me needed somewhere to go. 3 days after that terrible text message, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in months. I cleaned. Not the surface cleaning I'd been managing, but the deep, therapeutic kind of cleaning that women do when their worlds are falling apart, and they need to restore order somewhere, anywhere. I started in Thomas's study, a room I'd barely touched since he passed away 3 years ago. His books still lined the shelves. His reading glasses still sat on the mahogany desk he'd inherited from his father. I'd kept it as a shrine to our marriage, but now it felt more like a mausoleum, a dead space in a house that was supposed to be for the living. As I dusted his bookshelf, my fingers traced the spine of his old accounting ledgers from the construction business. Thomas had been meticulous about record-keeping, a habit that had served him well during tax season, but had driven me crazy when he'd insist on documenting every household expense down to the penny. That's when I found it. Tucked between his 1998 and 1999 business ledgers was a manila envelope I'd never seen before, sealed and yellowed with age. My name was written across the front in Thomas's careful handwriting. For Eleanor, when you need to remember your worth. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents that made no sense at first glance. Bank statements from institutions I didn't recognize, investment portfolios in my name that I'd never opened, life insurance policies I'd never seen, and a letter, dated just 2 months before Thomas's cancer diagnosis, written in his increasingly shaky handwriting. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably struggling in ways I wish I could have prevented. I've watched you give and give and give, always putting everyone else's needs before your own. And I've been afraid of what would happen to you when I wasn't there to remind you of your value. I've been quietly setting aside money for years, investments and accounts that only you can access. Not Sarah, not the grandchildren, only you. I did this because I know you, my love. I know you would give away your last dollar if someone you loved needed it, even if that meant you went without. This money is for you, for your security, your independence, your right to say no when people try to take advantage of your generous heart. Don't you dare feel guilty about having it. You earned every penny through 52 years of making my life better, of raising our daughter, of being the kind of woman who makes the world a better place simply by existing in it. The account numbers and contact information are attached. The lawyer, Robert Hensley, has been managing everything. He's a good man who will explain it all to you when you're ready. Remember, Eleanor, you are not a bank account for other people to withdraw from. You are not a convenience store for other people's needs. You are a woman of tremendous worth, and this money is proof that someone saw that worth and wanted to protect it. Use it wisely. Use it for yourself. Use it to live the life you deserve. All my love, forever and always, Thomas P.S. If Sarah is giving you trouble about money, show her these documents. Sometimes people need to see proof of your independence before they remember to treat you with respect. I read the letter 3 times before the words sank in. Then I looked at the bank statements. The numbers seemed impossible at first. Surely there had been some mistake, some decimal point error. But as I examined document after document, the reality became undeniable. Thomas had left me $1.2 million. Not in our joint accounts that Sarah had been helping me manage since my small fall last year. Not in the checking account that somehow seemed to drain faster than I could explain. This was separate money, protected money, money that belonged only to me. I sank into Thomas's old leather chair, the one that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and tried to process what I was discovering. While I'd been worrying about grocery bills and utility payments, while I'd been allowing Sarah to help me manage my finances, while I'd been feeling like a burden on my family's resources, I'd actually been a wealthy woman. The investment statements showed steady growth over the past 3 years. Thomas had chosen conservative funds that prioritized stability over aggressive returns. So like him to think of my security first. The life insurance payout I'd received after his death had been substantial, but apparently that had only been part of what he'd left me. The rest had been growing quietly, waiting for me to discover it. There were also records of automatic withdrawals I didn't recognize. Monthly payments to something called Walsh Family Emergency Fund that had been coming from my main checking account for the past 2 years. $2,000 every month, $24,000 a year, going to an account I'd never authorized. My heart started pounding as I reached for the phone to call the bank. The customer service representative was polite but firm. The withdrawals had been authorized by Sarah Walsh Morrison, who was listed as a co-signer on my account with power of attorney for financial decisions. When was this authorization granted? I asked, my voice barely steady. According to our records, Mrs. Walsh, it was set up in October 2022, shortly after you experienced a medical emergency. Your daughter indicated it was necessary to ensure your bills could be paid if you were incapacitated. October 2022. My small fall in the kitchen. I'd been shaken up, maybe a little confused from hitting my head, and Sarah had insisted on helping me get my affairs in order. I remembered signing papers, but I'd trusted her completely. She was my daughter, my only child, the person I'd assumed would always have my best interests at heart. And this emergency fund, I continued. Who has access to those payments? The account holder is listed as Sarah Walsh Morrison, with David Morrison as a secondary authorized user. $24,000 a year for 2 years. $48,000 of my money, taken without my knowledge, used for purposes I'd never approved. While I'd been carefully clipping coupons and buying generic brands to stretch my grocery budget, my daughter and son-in-law had been systematically draining my accounts. I called Robert Hensley, the lawyer Thomas had mentioned. His voice was warm and patient, the kind of professional who specialized in helping elderly clients navigate complex financial situations. Mrs. Walsh, I've been wondering when you'd contact me. Your husband gave very specific instructions about when to reveal these assets to you. He was concerned about your generous nature and wanted to ensure you had resources that couldn't be accessed by well-meaning family members. Well-meaning, I repeated bitterly. Is that what you call stealing $48,000 from your mother? I'm afraid that's more common than you might think, Robert said gently. Adult children often convince themselves they're acting in their parents' best interest while actually serving their own needs. Would you like to schedule an appointment to discuss your options? The next morning, I sat in Robert's downtown Chicago office, surrounded by diplomas and legal awards that spoke to decades of experience protecting people like me from people like Sarah. The view from his 20th floor window showed Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon, vast and gray under the November sky. Your husband was very thorough, Robert explained, spreading documents across his mahogany conference table. These accounts are in your name only, with no co-signers or authorized users. The funds can't be accessed without your explicit written consent, and even then, only you can make withdrawal decisions. He walked me through everything. The investment accounts that had grown to nearly $1.4 million, the savings accounts earning steady interest, the certificate of deposits that matured annually. There was even a small property investment, a duplex in a nice neighborhood that generated monthly rental income. Thomas also included instructions for what he called financial independence protocols. Robert continued, he anticipated that you might need to restructure your financial relationships with family members if they took advantage of your generosity. I thought about the too slow text message, about the years of forgotten birthdays and rushed phone calls, about the systematic withdrawal of $48,000 from my account. Taking advantage felt like an understatement. What kind of restructuring? I asked. Robert smiled, not unkindly, but with the satisfaction of someone who'd helped many clients reclaim their power. Complete financial independence, new accounts they can't access, revocation of any existing power of attorney arrangements, legal documentation that protects your assets from future manipulation. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made decisions based entirely on what I wanted, not what would make other people happy or comfortable. I opened new accounts at a different bank, one where Sarah had never set foot. I transferred my existing balances, closed the old accounts, and revoked every financial authorization I'd ever granted. The paperwork felt like armor, each signature a declaration of independence from people who'd been treating me like their personal ATM machine. But the real test came that evening when Sarah called, her voice tight with panic. "Mom, there's something wrong with your account." My card got declined when I tried to buy groceries, and when I called the bank, they said the account was closed. What happened? For the first time in years, I felt completely calm. Nothing happened, Sarah. I simply decided to manage my own finances again. But Mom, we talked about this. You agreed that it was safer for me to help you after your fall. What if you forget to pay a bill? What if something happens to you? Something did happen to me, I said quietly. I discovered that you've been taking $2,000 from my account every month for 2 years without telling me. Silence. Then, the sound I'd been dreading and somehow anticipating. Sarah's voice shifting from panic to manipulation, from daughter to adversary. "Mom, that money was for emergencies, for your own good. You don't understand how expensive it is to maintain your house, your insurance, your medical bills. David and I have been covering costs you don't even know about." "Which costs?" I asked. Another pause. "Well, various things. It's complicated. Look, this isn't something we should discuss over the phone. Why don't David and I come over tomorrow and we can sit down and go through everything together?" "No," I said, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff. "If you want to discuss my finances, you can make an appointment with my lawyer." "Your lawyer?" Sarah's voice pitched higher. "Mom, what's gotten into you? Why are you being so suspicious and hostile? We're your family. We love you." Love. The word hung between us like a challenge. "If you love me," I said slowly, "then why did you tell me I was too slow to share a meal with my own family?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Mom, that was just... we were running late, and the kids were hungry, and... Goodbye, Sarah." I hung up the phone and sat in Thomas's chair, surrounded by documents that proved my worth in ways my family never had. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe deeply. The war was just beginning, but I finally had weapons to fight it. The morning after I hung up on Sarah, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 12 text messages. The progression told a story that was almost comical in its predictability. Panic, then anger, then manipulation, then threats, and finally, pathetic pleading. "Mom, please call me back. I'm worried about you. This is ridiculous. You're acting crazy and I'm concerned about your mental state. I'm calling Dr. Peterson to discuss your behavior. This isn't normal for you. Fine, be stubborn. But when you need help, don't expect us to come running. Mom, I love you. Please don't let money come between us. Family is more important than this." I deleted every single message without responding and made myself breakfast. Real breakfast, not the toast and instant coffee I'd been surviving on while my grocery money disappeared into Sarah's emergency fund. I scrambled 2 eggs, made fresh coffee in the French press Thomas had bought me years ago, and ate slowly while watching the morning news. For the first time in months, I wasn't worried about the cost of the eggs or rationing my coffee to make it last longer. I had money. Real money. Enough money to eat well for the rest of my life without asking anyone for permission or feeling guilty about every purchase. The freedom was intoxicating. At 10 o'clock, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I drove to Nordstrom, not the outlet store where I usually shopped for clearance items, but the actual Nordstrom in downtown Chicago, where Sarah used to beg me to take her when she was a teenager. The sales associate, an elegant woman about Sarah's age named Patricia, approached with the kind of professional warmth that made me remember when shopping used to be pleasurable instead of an exercise in deprivation. "Can I help you find something today?" "I need new clothes," I said. And then, surprising myself with my honesty, "I haven't bought anything new for myself in 3 years. I'm not even sure what my size is anymore. Patricia's expression shifted to something deeper than professional courtesy. Well then, let's figure that out together. What's the occasion? My new life, I said, and meant it. 3 hours later, I walked out of that store with shopping bags full of clothes that actually fit my 73-year-old body, in colors that complemented my silver hair instead of washing me out. A cashmere sweater in deep burgundy that made my skin glow. A wool coat in charcoal gray that made me feel elegant instead of invisible. Comfortable shoes that didn't come from the discount rack. Undergarments that actually provided support instead of just covering the necessities. The total was more than I used to spend on clothes in an entire year. But as I handed over my new credit card, the one Sarah had no access to, I felt powerful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. That afternoon, I made another decision that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. I called a housekeeping service. I'd like someone to come in twice a week, I told the scheduler. Deep cleaning, laundry, whatever needs to be done. I'm 73 and tired of spending my days scrubbing floors. The woman on the phone was matter-of-fact about the arrangement. No judgment, no suggestion that I should be able to handle these tasks myself, no implication that hiring help was lazy or indulgent. Just professional efficiency in setting up services I could easily afford. Maria arrived the next morning, a cheerful woman in her 40s who spoke with a slight accent and treated my house like it deserved care and attention. She brought her own supplies, worked methodically through each room, and transformed my home from a space I'd been struggling to maintain into a place that sparkled with cleanliness and order. "You have beautiful things," she said, carefully dusting a crystal vase that had belonged to my mother. "This house has good energy. Happy memories." It did have happy memories, I realized. 45 years of marriage, birthday parties, holiday dinners, quiet evenings with Thomas reading while I knitted. The house itself wasn't the problem. The problem was that I'd been too exhausted and depressed to see its beauty anymore. When Maria left, I walked through each gleaming room like I was seeing it for the first time. The hardwood floors glowed with polish. The windows sparkled in the afternoon light. Even the air seemed cleaner, fresher, full of possibility instead of stagnant with grief and neglect. That evening, I did something else I hadn't done in years. I cooked for pleasure instead of necessity. Not a simple meal designed to use up leftovers or stretch a small grocery budget, but an actual recipe that required multiple ingredients and careful attention. Beef bourguignon, Thomas's favorite dish. One I hadn't made since he died because it seemed pointless to cook something so elaborate for just myself. I opened a bottle of good wine. Not the cheap stuff I'd been buying, but a real bottle from a vineyard Thomas and I had visited on our anniversary trip to California 15 years ago. I'd been saving it for a special occasion that never seemed to come. Tonight, I realized, was the special occasion. Tonight was the night I stopped waiting for permission to enjoy my own life. The phone rang while the beef was braising, filling my kitchen with aromas that transported me back to happier times. It was Emma, my 16-year-old granddaughter, and her voice carried an uncertainty I'd never heard before. "Grandma? Mom said you're going through some stuff. Are you okay?" The question surprised me. When was the last time anyone in my family had asked if I was okay and actually waited for an answer? "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually. How are you?" "I'm confused, I guess. Mom and Dad are really upset about something with money, and they keep talking about you like you're sick or something. But you sound normal." Normal. Such a simple word, but it meant everything to hear it from someone who wasn't trying to manipulate or control me. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Sure. When was the last time you and I spent time together? Just the two of us?" A long pause. I don't know. It's been a while, I guess. I've been really busy with school and stuff. Would you like to have lunch with me this weekend? Just us?" Another pause, but this one felt different. Thoughtful instead of uncomfortable. "Yeah," she said, and I could hear surprise in her own voice. "Yeah, I'd like that." "Good. I'll pick you up Saturday at noon. We'll go somewhere nice." After I hung up, I realized I'd just taken another step toward reclaiming my life. Instead of waiting to be included in family activities that made me feel unwelcome, I was creating my own opportunities for connection. Instead of accepting the crumbs of attention my family threw my way, I was offering something better. Genuine time and attention focused on building a relationship instead of managing one. Saturday arrived gray and cold, typical November weather in Chicago. I picked up Emma in my newly detailed car, another small luxury I'd treated myself to during my week of liberation. She slid into the passenger seat wearing the kind of outfit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget used to be, but her expression was uncertain, almost shy. "Where are we going?" she asked. "The Palmer House," I said, watching her eyes widen. "For high tea." The Palmer House was where Thomas had taken me for our first anniversary, back when we were young and barely scraping by. But he'd wanted to make me feel special. It was elegant, expensive, and completely unnecessary. Exactly the kind of place I'd stopped going after he died because it seemed too indulgent for a woman alone. Emma had never experienced high tea before, and watching her navigate the tiny sandwiches and delicate pastries was like seeing the world through fresh eyes. But more importantly, without the distraction of phones or other family members competing for attention, we actually talked. Really talked. She told me about her anxiety over college applications, her fear that she wasn't smart enough for the schools her parents expected her to attend. She talked about feeling pressure to be perfect, to represent the family well, to never disappoint anyone. She confided that sometimes she felt like she was performing her life instead of living it. I listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, without trying to fix anything. Just listened, the way I wished someone would listen to me. "Grandma," she said as we finished our second pot of tea, "can I tell you something? Anything. Sometimes I feel like everyone in our family is angry all the time, like we're all pretending to be happy, but actually we're just stressed. Like there's never enough time or money or patience for anything." Her words hit me like a physical blow. This beautiful, intelligent young woman was growing up in the same atmosphere of scarcity and tension that had defined my last few years. The feeling that there was never enough love, attention, or resources to go around. "Emma," I said carefully, "what if I told you that feeling doesn't have to be permanent? That sometimes people can change their circumstances if they're brave enough to make different choices?" She looked at me with eyes that seemed much older than 16. "Is that what you're doing? Making different choices?" "Yes," I said simply. "For the first time in years, I'm choosing myself." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching other families navigate their own complicated dynamics at neighboring tables. Some looked genuinely happy, others looked like they were enduring obligation disguised as affection. I wondered which category my family fell into, and whether it mattered anymore. When I dropped Emma off at her house, she hugged me. Really hugged me. Not the perfunctory embrace I'd grown accustomed to. It was the first time in months that someone had touched me with genuine affection, and I had to fight back tears. "Thanks, Grandma," she said. "I had fun. Can we do this again sometime?" "Anytime you want," I promised. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Sarah watching from her living room window, her expression unreadable. Let her watch, I thought. Let her wonder what her daughter and I had talked about. Let her worry that maybe, just maybe, someone in her family was starting to see through the performance of happy dysfunction they'd all been maintaining. That night, I sat in Thomas's chair with a glass of wine and a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. That felt too ambitious still. But contentment. The satisfaction of a day well lived, of choices made for the right reasons, of connection formed without ulterior motives. I was starting to remember who I used to be before I became someone whose primary function was to make other people's lives easier. I was starting to imagine who I might become if I kept choosing myself. The war with my family wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. But for the first time, I felt like I might actually win, not because I wanted to destroy them, but because I was finally ready to save myself. The ambush came exactly 1 week after my lunch with Emma. I was enjoying my Tuesday morning coffee, real coffee, not the instant stuff I'd been rationing, when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched Sarah, David, and even Jake emerge from their luxury SUV, with the grim determination of people preparing for battle. Sarah didn't knock. She used her key, the one I'd given her years ago for emergencies, and walked into my house like she owned it. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floors that Maria had polished to a gleaming shine, and I could see her taking in the cleanliness, the fresh flowers I'd bought myself, the general atmosphere of a woman who was no longer barely surviving. "Mom, we need to talk," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. David followed behind her, his expression uncomfortable but determined, while 13-year-old Jake hung back near the door like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Good morning to you too," I said mildly, not getting up from my chair. "Would anyone like coffee?" "This isn't a social call," Sarah snapped, then seemed to catch herself. Her voice shifted to the patronizing tone she used when she was trying to manipulate me. "Mom, we're all very concerned about you. The way you've been acting lately, it's not like you." "You're right," I agreed pleasantly. "It's not like me to put my own needs first. I'm still getting used to it." David stepped forward, playing the role of reasonable son-in-law. "Eleanor, we know you're upset about the financial arrangements, but cutting us off completely was extreme. We've been handling your affairs for 2 years now, keeping you safe from scams and poor decisions. This sudden independence kick could put you at risk." "What kind of risks?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear how they'd frame their theft as protection. "Identity theft? Predatory lending? Investment scams?" Sarah jumped in. "Mom, you're 73 years old. You haven't managed your own finances in years. What if someone takes advantage of you?" The irony was so thick I almost laughed. "Someone already did take advantage of me, Sarah. You withdrew $48,000 from my account without my knowledge. If that's not theft, what would you call it?" "That's not theft." Sarah's voice pitched higher, losing the controlled tone she'd started with. "That money went toward your expenses, your insurance premiums, your property taxes, maintenance on this house. We were protecting your assets." "Show me the receipts," I said quietly. "What?" "The receipts. The documentation. If you spent $48,000 on my expenses, you should have records. Insurance payments, tax payments, repair bills. Show me where my money went." The silence stretched uncomfortably. David shifted his weight, avoiding eye contact. Sarah's face flushed red. "We don't have to justify every expense to you," she said finally. "We were acting in good faith, trying to help you." "No," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "You were stealing from me, and now that I've cut off your access to my money, you're here to intimidate me into giving it back." Jake, who'd been silent through this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Dad, can we go? This is weird." "Jake, go wait in the car," David said sharply. "No," I said, standing up for the first time since they'd arrived. "Jake, you can stay if you want to. This is a family discussion, and you're part of this family." The boy looked torn between his parents' authority and his grandmother's invitation. Finally, he mumbled, I'll wait outside," and fled. Smart kid. He could sense the ugliness brewing. With Jake gone, the pretense of civility evaporated completely. Sarah began pacing my kitchen like a caged animal, her designer handbag swinging from her shoulder with each agitated turn. "Fine," she said. "You want to know where your money went? It went to maintaining your lifestyle. Do you think this house maintains itself? Do you think your insurance premiums pay themselves? Do you think the money fairy covers your medical expenses?" "I know exactly what my expenses are," I replied calmly. "I've been managing them just fine since I took control of my accounts. My monthly expenses total about $1,800. You were taking $2,000 every month. Where did the extra money go?" David finally spoke up, his voice carrying the arrogance of someone who'd clearly been the architect of this scheme. "Eleanor, you're being unreasonable. Sarah and I have been covering expenses you don't even know about. The cost of managing your affairs, the time we've invested in your care, the financial planning we've done on your behalf. We deserve compensation for that service." "Compensation," I repeated slowly. "You've been paying yourselves to steal from me." "We weren't stealing," Sarah exploded. "We were being responsible. Do you know how many elderly people get scammed every year? How many lose their life savings to con artists? We were protecting you. From everyone except yourselves, apparently." The words hung in the air like a slap. Sarah's face went white, then red, then white again. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "How dare you?" Sarah whispered. How dare you accuse us of, after everything we've done for you, after all the times we've helped you, supported you, included you in our lives when it would have been easier to just, when other families would have what? I asked when she trailed off. Put me in a nursing home? Cut me out of their lives entirely? Is that the threat you're making now? It's not a threat, David said, his reasonable facade cracking. It's reality. You're getting older, Eleanor. Your judgment isn't what it used to be. These paranoid delusions about theft, this sudden obsession with money, this hostile attitude toward people who've been trying to help you, these could be signs of cognitive decline. Cognitive decline. The ultimate weapon in the arsenal of adult children who want to control their aging parents. Question their financial decisions? Cognitive decline. Assert your independence? Cognitive decline. Refuse to be manipulated? Cognitive decline. Are you threatening to have me declared incompetent? I asked. We're trying to help you understand that you need help, Sarah said, her voice taking on that fake concerned tone again. Mom, we love you. We want what's best for you. But this behavior, cutting us off financially, making wild accusations, isolating yourself from family, it's not normal. What's not normal? I said, my voice rising for the first time, is stealing from your mother and then gaslighting her when she discovers it. What's not normal is telling your mother she's too slow to eat dinner with her own family. What's not normal is taking $48,000 and then acting like the victim when you get caught. We didn't steal anything, Sarah screamed, abandoning all pretense of concern. That money was supposed to be for us anyway. Do you think we don't know about Dad's secret accounts? Do you think we don't know you're sitting on over $1 million while you let us struggle? There it was. The truth, finally. Not concern for my welfare, not protection from scammers, not cognitive decline. Just pure, ugly greed. You're not struggling, I said quietly. You live in a 4,000-square-foot house in Winnetka. You drive a $60,000 car. You send your children to private school and take vacations to Europe. You're not struggling. You're just greedy. That money should be ours, David said, his composure finally breaking completely. We're your family. We're the ones who'll be taking care of you when you can't take care of yourself. We're the ones who'll inherit everything anyway. Why should we have to wait until you die to access what's rightfully ours? The words hung in the air like poison gas. In his anger, David had revealed the truth they'd been dancing around for years. I wasn't a mother or a human being with inherent worth. I was an obstacle standing between them and money they considered theirs by right. Get out, I said. Mom, please. Sarah tried one more time, her voice breaking. Don't let money destroy our family. We can work this out. We can sit down with a mediator or a financial planner or even a therapist. But don't throw away our relationship over a misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding, I said, walking to the front door and opening it. This is theft, manipulation, and emotional abuse. And it ends now. David stormed out first, his face red with fury. Sarah lingered, tears streaming down her cheeks in what might have been genuine emotion or calculated manipulation. Mom, I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry about the text message. I'm sorry about the money. I'm sorry about all of it. Please don't cut us out of your life. Please don't punish Emma and Jake for our mistakes. For a moment, I almost wavered. The tears looked real, the apology sounded sincere, and the mention of my grandchildren hit exactly where she intended it to hit. But then I remembered the years of forgotten birthdays, the rushed phone calls, the loneliness of recovering from medical procedures alone. I remembered the systematic withdrawal of money from my accounts, the casual cruelty of being told I was too slow to share a meal with my own family. Sarah, I said gently, if you want a relationship with me, you need to learn to treat me with respect. Not because I have money, not because you need something from me, but because I'm your mother, and I deserve basic human dignity. But I do respect you, she said desperately. No, I said sadly. You don't. You might love me in your way, but you don't respect me. And until you learn the difference, we don't have anything to talk about. I closed the door softly, turned the deadbolt, and stood in my hallway listening to their muffled voices outside. Then the slam of car doors. Then the sound of their SUV driving away. The house felt different afterward. Not empty, peaceful, like a storm had passed and left clear skies behind. I walked to Thomas's study and sat in his leather chair, surrounded by the documents that had given me the power to finally stand up for myself. On his desk, I kept the last photo we'd taken together, just a few months before his diagnosis. We looked happy, content, secure in our love for each other. "I did it, Thomas," I whispered to his picture. I finally told them no. For the first time since that devastating text message, I felt like myself again. Not someone's convenient mother or available ATM, but Eleanor Walsh. A woman of worth, a woman with boundaries, a woman who would no longer accept less than she deserved. The war wasn't over, but the most important battle had been won. I had remembered how to fight for myself. The silence after my family left wasn't the hollow, echoing silence I'd grown accustomed to over the past few years. This was different. Rich, full, pregnant with possibility. It was the silence of a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in her own life. I stood in my hallway for a long time, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades. Complete ownership of my own choices. No one to accommodate, no one to please, no one to consider except myself. The freedom was so overwhelming I had to sit down on my bottom step and just breathe. That evening, I did something I'd been thinking about for weeks, but hadn't had the courage to attempt. I called my old friend Margaret in Arizona, the one who'd asked me that pivotal question about being used. "Eleanor!" Her voice was warm with genuine pleasure. "I've been thinking about you constantly since our last conversation. How are you doing?" "I'm doing something I never thought I'd do," I said. "I'm choosing myself." Over the next hour, I told her everything. The discovery of Thomas's hidden assets, the confrontation with Sarah and David, the systematic theft disguised as financial assistance. Margaret listened without interruption, making small sounds of understanding and encouragement. "You know what this means, don't you?" she said when I finished. "What?" "You're free. For the first time in probably decades, you're completely free to live your life exactly as you want to live it. Free." The words settled into my bones like warm honey. I was free. "Margaret," I said slowly, "what would you say if I told you I was thinking about traveling? Maybe coming to visit you in Arizona?" "I'd say it's about damn time." She laughed. "Eleanor, I've been hoping you'd come see me for years. I have a beautiful guest room, and there's so much I want to show you here. The sunsets alone would heal your soul." We talked for another hour, planning a trip that felt like the first real adventure I'd contemplated since Thomas died. Margaret described her life in Sedona. The art galleries, the hiking trails, the community of vibrant women who'd chosen to spend their later years exploring instead of shrinking. "There's something I should tell you," Margaret said as our conversation began to wind down. "I didn't move to Arizona just to be near my son. I moved here to get away from my daughter." The admission hung between us like a confession. "She was draining me," Margaret continued. "Not just financially, though there was that too. Emotionally. I felt like I was disappearing, becoming just a support system for her chaos. Moving here was the best decision I ever made. I'm not a mother first anymore. I'm Margaret first, and everything else second. Margaret first. Eleanor first." The concept was revolutionary. After we hung up, I sat in Thomas's study with a legal pad making lists. Not grocery lists or to-do lists, but life lists. Things I wanted to experience, places I wanted to see, activities I wanted to try. When was the last time I'd thought about what I wanted instead of what everyone else needed? I wanted to travel. I wanted to take art classes. I wanted to read books without feeling guilty about the time I was wasting. I wanted to eat dinner at restaurants without calculating the cost. I wanted to buy flowers for my own table just because they made me happy. The list grew longer as I wrote, filling page after page with dreams I'd been suppressing for years. Some were practical: renovating my kitchen, joining a book club, taking a cooking class. Others were more ambitious: visiting Italy, learning to paint, maybe even writing about my experiences. But the most important item on my list was the simplest: stop apologizing for existing. The next morning, I called Robert Hensley, my lawyer, and made an appointment to discuss something that had been percolating in my mind since the confrontation with my family. I want to do something meaningful with my money, I told him when we met in his office. Something that would make Thomas proud, but also something that reflects who I'm becoming. Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. What kind of something? I want to help other women who are in the situation I was in. Women who are being financially exploited by their own families, who don't know they have options, who think they have to accept abuse because they're afraid of being alone. The idea had been building in my mind for weeks, crystallizing into something concrete and powerful. How many other women were sitting in their homes right now, wondering why they felt so invisible and worthless? How many were being systematically drained by children who saw them as convenient resources rather than human beings deserving of respect? I want to create a foundation, I continued. Something that provides legal assistance, financial counseling, and emotional support to elderly women who are being exploited by their families. I want to call it the Eleanor Walsh Foundation for Women's Independence. Robert's smile was genuine and admiring. Eleanor, that's a beautiful idea. And with your resources, you could make a real difference. How much are you thinking of dedicating to this foundation? $500,000 to start, I said, surprised by my own boldness. Maybe more as it grows. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the logistics of establishing a charitable foundation, the legal requirements, the tax implications, the governance structure. But more than that, we talked about the vision, creating a network of support for women who needed help reclaiming their power and dignity. There's something else, I said as our meeting was wrapping up. I want to make sure my family can't challenge this financially. I want to protect these assets from any claims they might make about my mental competency. Robert nodded approvingly. We can absolutely do that. In fact, I'd recommend we draft new estate planning documents that clearly reflect your current wishes and mental state, and perhaps we should arrange for a psychological evaluation to document your cognitive clarity, just to be thorough. 3 weeks later, I had a clean bill of mental health from Dr. Rebecca Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in cognitive assessments. Her report was clear and unequivocal. I was mentally sharp, emotionally stable, and fully capable of making my own financial decisions. Mrs. Walsh, Dr. Chen said as we concluded our sessions, I have to tell you, it's refreshing to meet someone your age who's choosing growth over stagnation. Most of my patients are dealing with decline, but you're clearly in a phase of expansion and self-discovery. I'm 73 years old, I said with a laugh. I figured it was now or never. Age is just a number, she replied. You're proof that it's never too late to start living authentically. The foundation became real with surprising speed. Robert helped me establish the legal structure, and I hired a small but dedicated staff to begin accepting applications from women who needed help. The first case that came across my desk broke my heart and filled me with purpose simultaneously. Dorothy Martinez, 78 years old, had been giving her son $1,500 a month for emergencies that never seemed to end. Her grandson needed car repairs, her daughter-in-law needed help with medical bills, her son needed assistance with his mortgage. Dorothy had been sleeping on a mattress on the floor because she couldn't afford a bed after covering everyone else's expenses. I personally paid for Dorothy to get a proper bedroom set, and our foundation's legal team helped her establish boundaries with her family. 6 months later, she sent me a photo of herself in her new apartment, a senior living community where she'd made friends and joined a bridge club. I never thought I'd be happy again, she wrote. Thank you for showing me that I deserve to be treated with dignity. The foundation grew quickly, word spreading through social workers, elder care attorneys, and women's support groups. Each case we handled felt like a small victory against the systematic devaluation of older women, proof that it was possible to reclaim your power even when everyone around you had convinced you that you were powerless. But the real transformation was happening in my own life. I took that trip to Arizona, spending 2 weeks with Margaret exploring red rock formations and art galleries. I signed up for a watercolor class at the local community college, discovering a talent I never knew I had. I joined a book club where women discussed literature with passion and intelligence, treating each other's opinions with respect. Most importantly, I began to see myself differently, not as someone's inconvenient mother or burdensome elderly relative, but as Eleanor Walsh, a woman with her own interests, her own resources, her own right to happiness. The day I received my first painting back from the framer, a sunset over Lake Michigan painted from memory of evenings spent with Thomas, I hung it in my living room with pride, not because it was particularly good, but because it was mine, created by me, for me, representing my own vision of beauty. Emma called me one evening in late spring, her voice tentative but hopeful. "Grandma, I was wondering, could we have lunch again sometime? Like we did before?" "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love that. And maybe you could teach me some of the things you've been learning? Mom mentioned you're taking art classes." I smiled, remembering the uncertain girl who'd sat across from me at high tea, feeling trapped by her family's expectations. I'd be honored to share what I've learned. "But Emma, I think you might teach me a few things too." Our lunch the following Saturday was different from our first one. Emma was more relaxed, more open, more willing to share her authentic thoughts instead of the carefully curated responses she'd been trained to give. She talked about college plans that reflected her interests rather than her parents' ambitions, about friendships that brought her joy, about a future that excited rather than terrified her. "Grandma," she said as we finished our meal, "I want to ask you something, but I don't want to upset you. You can ask me anything. Are you happier now? Since everything changed with Mom and Dad?" I considered the question carefully. Was I happier? The past 6 months had been challenging, sometimes lonely, often uncertain, but they'd also been authentic in a way my life hadn't been for years. "Yes," I said finally. "I am happier. Not because I don't love your parents, I do, but because I finally learned to love myself too." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "I think I understand. It's like you stopped trying to be what everyone wanted you to be and started being who you actually are." "Exactly," I said, amazed by her insight. "And Emma, that's something you never have to wait until you're 73 to do. You can start being authentically yourself right now." As we left the restaurant, Emma linked her arm through mine, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. For the first time in years, I felt like I was walking with family who saw me as a person rather than a function. The woman who had sat alone in her kitchen 6 months ago, reading a text message that told her she was too slow to matter, was gone. In her place was Eleanor Walsh, artist, philanthropist, grandmother, and most importantly, a woman who had remembered her own worth. I was no longer disappearing into the needs of others. I was finally, fully myself. 1 year later, I stood in the ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel, the same place where Emma and I had shared our first real conversation, watching 300 women celebrate the first annual Eleanor Walsh Foundation Gala. The theme was Reclaiming Your Voice, and the room buzzed with the energy of women who had learned to speak up for themselves after decades of silence. I wore a dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion, deep emerald green silk that made my silver hair shine like starlight. The woman in the hotel mirrors looked confident, purposeful, alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. She bore little resemblance to the broken woman who'd sat alone in her kitchen reading that cruel text message 18 months ago. "Eleanor, you look absolutely radiant," said Dr. Patricia Williams, the foundation's executive director. Patricia was a retired social worker who'd dedicated her career to advocating for vulnerable adults. When I'd interviewed her for the position, her first question had been, "Are you prepared for the pushback? Because when you help women find their power, the people who've been exploiting them don't go quietly." She'd been right about the pushback. Sarah had made several attempts to reconcile over the past year, each one following the same pattern. Initial anger, followed by manipulation, then threats about my mental state, and finally, desperate pleading wrapped in declarations of love. I'd learned to recognize the cycle and respond consistently, with boundaries, not engagement. The most recent attempt had come just 2 weeks ago. Sarah had shown up at my house with tears in her eyes and Emma by her side, clearly hoping my granddaughter's presence would soften my resolve. "Mom, I've been in therapy," she'd announced through my screen door, which I hadn't opened. "I realize now that I was wrong about the money. I want to make things right between us." "That's wonderful, Sarah," I'd replied calmly. "When you've completed your therapy and made a genuine commitment to treating me with respect, we can discuss rebuilding our relationship. Until then, I wish you well." Emma had given me an apologetic look and mouthed, "Sorry," before following her mother back to their car. My granddaughter understood the game being played and didn't want any part of it. Our relationship had continued to grow independently of the family drama, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Now, as I looked out at the ballroom full of women who'd found their voices, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived with purpose. The foundation had helped over 200 women in its first year. Women like Martha, who'd discovered her son had been forging her signature on checks for 3 years. Like Carmen, whose daughter had been using her credit cards to fund a gambling addiction. Like Rose, who'd been living in a garage apartment behind her son's house while he rented out her own home and kept the profits. Each story was different, but the pattern was always the same. Love weaponized against the person who'd given it freely. Kindness exploited by those who should have protected it. Generosity rewarded with contempt disguised as concern. The evening's keynote speaker was Dr. Susan Chen, a renowned psychologist who specialized in financial abuse among the elderly. As she took the podium, the room fell silent. "Ladies," she began, "we're here tonight because of a simple truth that our society doesn't want to acknowledge. Being a loving mother doesn't guarantee you'll be treated with love in return. Being generous doesn't guarantee gratitude. Being self-sacrificing doesn't guarantee respect." A murmur of recognition rippled through the audience. The women in this room have learned what Eleanor Walsh learned, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable the people who are hurting you, that sometimes protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. When Dr. Chen finished speaking, she called me to the podium to accept an award for outstanding advocacy in elder rights. As I walked across that stage, my legs steady despite my 74 years, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 18 months ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone, I received a text message that changed my life. 8 words that seemed simple but contained within them the dismissal of everything I thought I was worth. "You're too slow, we'll eat without you." The room was completely silent now. Those words came from my daughter, about a family dinner I'd prepared a homemade pie for, at a house where I'd contributed to the down payment, to eat with grandchildren I'd helped raise. And in that moment, I realized that I had become invisible in my own life. I paused, looking out at faces that reflected my own experience back at me. But here's what I want you to understand. That text message was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to see what I'd been refusing to acknowledge, that I had been allowing myself to disappear, one small compromise at a time, one ignored boundary at a time, one unreciprocated sacrifice at a time. A woman in the front row was crying now, nodding her head in recognition. "I want to tell you about a letter my late husband left for me. He wrote, 'You are not a bank account for other people to withdraw from. You are not a convenience store for other people's needs. You are a woman of tremendous worth. Tonight, I want each of you to remember those words. Not just for me, but for yourselves.'" The applause was thunderous, but more than that, it was personal. These women weren't just clapping for a speech. They were celebrating their own journeys from exploitation to empowerment. After the gala, I drove home through the quiet Chicago streets, my car filled with flowers from well-wishers and my heart full of contentment. The house that had once felt like a monument to loneliness now welcomed me like an old friend. Maria had left fresh flowers on the kitchen table, and a note that Emma had called to say she'd gotten into Northwestern University, her first choice, chosen for her love of journalism rather than her parents' expectations. I poured myself a glass of the good wine, there was no longer any other kind in my house, and settled into Thomas's chair with a book I'd been wanting to read. The silence around me was rich and full, the kind of peace that comes from living authentically rather than apologetically. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for just a moment, I felt that old familiar spike of anxiety. But the message was from Dorothy Martinez, the first woman the foundation had helped. "Eleanor, I just wanted you to know. I had dinner with my son tonight, and when he asked me for money, I said no. And you know what? The world didn't end. Thank you for teaching me that I matter too." I smiled, remembering my own first no, and how terrifying it had felt. Now, 18 months later, no had become one of my favorite words. No to unreasonable demands. No to disrespectful treatment. No to relationships that required me to diminish myself to make others comfortable. But I'd also learned to say yes in ways I never had before. Yes to new experiences. Yes to authentic relationships. Yes to my own dreams and desires. Yes to taking up space in my own life. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the window, I could see a young woman standing on my porch, holding what looked like a casserole dish. I didn't recognize her, but something about her posture, defeated, uncertain, hopeful, looked familiar. I opened the door to find a woman in her 60s with tired eyes and worn clothes. "Mrs. Walsh? I'm Linda Patterson. I got your number from the Foundation website. I hope you don't mind me coming by so late, but I didn't know where else to turn." I looked at Linda's face and saw myself from 18 months ago. A woman who'd been giving and giving until there was nothing left. A woman who'd forgotten she had the right to expect basic human decency from the people she loved. "Come in, Linda," I said, opening the door wide. "Let's make some tea and you can tell me what's happening." As Linda settled at my kitchen table and began to share her story, a familiar tale of financial exploitation disguised as family need, I realized that this was exactly where I was supposed to be, not just physically, but spiritually. This was my purpose. Helping other women remember their worth, showing them that it was possible to love their families without sacrificing themselves completely. "I brought you dinner," Linda said, gesturing to the casserole dish. "I didn't want to come empty-handed, and I thought maybe you might be lonely, eating by yourself." I smiled, remembering how I'd once thought the same thing, that being alone meant being lonely, that independence meant isolation. "Linda," I said gently, "I eat alone by choice now, and there's a world of difference between being alone and being lonely. When you're alone because you've chosen yourself, it's not empty, it's full of possibility." We talked until nearly midnight, and when Linda left, she carried with her the phone number for our legal aid program, a referral to a therapist who understood financial abuse, and most importantly, the knowledge that she wasn't crazy, she wasn't selfish, and she wasn't alone. After she left, I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd eaten that first devastating meal alone 18 months ago, and marveled at how completely my life had changed. The woman who'd once believed she was too slow to matter had become someone who moved through the world with purpose and dignity. The woman who'd once apologized for existing had learned to celebrate her own worth. I thought about Thomas and the letter he'd left me, about the foundation that bore my name, about the hundreds of women who'd found their voices because I'd found mine. I thought about Emma, thriving at college and calling me weekly not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. I thought about the art hanging on my walls, the trips I'd taken, the books I'd read, the life I'd built on my own terms. Most of all, I thought about that text message. "You're too slow, we'll eat without you." Sarah had been wrong about so many things, but she'd been right about one. They had eaten without me. They'd moved on with their lives, found other sources of funding for their emergencies, learned to manage without my constant availability and sacrifice. And I had discovered something beautiful. I could live without them too, not because I didn't love them, but because I'd finally learned to love myself. The lesson that had taken me 73 years to learn was simple but profound. You cannot love others well until you learn to love yourself. You cannot give respect to others if you don't demand it for yourself. You cannot build healthy relationships from a foundation of self-sacrifice and resentment. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was someone I'd been searching for my whole life without knowing it. Eleanor Walsh, complete and whole, belonging entirely to herself. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you were giving so much of yourself that you forgot who you were underneath all that giving? Have you ever loved someone who seemed to take your love for granted, treating your generosity as their right rather than your gift? If this story resonates with you, please share it in the comments. Let's start a conversation about what it means to love ourselves enough to demand the respect we deserve. And if you found hope in Eleanor's journey from invisible to invaluable, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. These stories need to be told, and together, we can make sure they reach the people who need to hear them most, because sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to disappear.